Only this time, interestingly, the Habsburgs in the Holy Roman Empire don't have to go to war over this themselves. What happened was that Maximilian, a very canny Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor and Duke of Austria, managed to seize the opportunity that appeared when Mary of Burgundy's father, Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, was killed in battle at the Battle of Nancy in 1477, where he was fighting with the Duke of Lorraine, because both of them were disputing this territory up here on the eastern flank of France, western flank of Holy Roman Empire. The territories of the Duke of Burgundy were these, the orange ones. The Netherlands, up here, and Burgundy and associated areas down here. So because he was killed at that battle, that left Burgundy with an heir who was a sole daughter. That is to say, there were no sons. This became another issue, is not just young sons at time of succession, but no sons. So here was Mary of Burgundy, the sole heiress of all of this territory up and through here. So Maximilian, Holy Roman Emperor right next door, promptly took advantage of that, married her in 1477, and by means of that marriage absorbed the Netherlands up here and Burgundy down here into the territories of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, technically, she did insist that in the marriage settlement, those territories were to go to their children, not to her husband if she died before he did. But from this point on, those territories become, in large part, de facto part of the patrimony of the Holy Roman Empire. So there too, you have the consolidation of territory, you have the elimination of some of these large dukes and their independent territories, in this case because Maximilian seized the day when it came to an available marriage. All right. Here's the case under Charles VIII in France. Remember this map? It's even more complicated than last time. I added a couple people. The situation in France was also one where what mattered was the age of the next heir at the time of succession and whether there were any male candidates at all. So you'll notice that Louis XI did not leave a lot of options here. He had two daughters, Jeanne de France and Anne de Beaujeu, and one son, and the son was the youngest of those three. And notice he's born in 1470. So when Louis died in 1483, Charles VIII was only 13. And here's the rule. You can be, in your own right, under your own authority, King of France at the age of 14. That's a very medieval concept right there, that you can be an adult at the age of 14, that you can reach your majority at the age of 14. But that was the rule. Nonetheless, Charles did not make it. So there was initially then a crisis over who would be his guardian. And not only who would be his guardian, but that can mean two different things. Who would physically have custody of him and continue his education and make sure he could rule by himself eventually? It's one aspect of that. The other aspect of that is who would be the regent for the country and would effectively rule in his stead. And there is no rule that says that it has to be the same person who is his custodian and is the regent of the country as well. So, the two candidates that were most obvious were his older sister, Anne de Beaujeu. She was at this point, as you'll see, 9 years older, so she was in her early 20s. She was also in particularly a candidate because she was the wife of Philip the Duke of Bourbon. So it wasn't just that she would be ruling, but that her husband would be helping her. Or the other alternate candidate was Louis. And this says Louis XII because that tells you what he became. But initially, because he was the cousin of the king and the oldest of the senior branch of the Orléans family, he at this point was Louis Duc d'Orléans, and so the eldest relative of the closest branch of the family. So here's who we have. We have Anne de Beaujeu, who in this particular picture is, being supported by her patron Saint Anne, the Duchess of Bourbon, and her very compliant and good-tempered husband Philip, the Duke of Bourbon, on one side, and on the other you have Louis d'Orléans and his cousin Charles, the Comte d'Angoulême, that is to say, that junior branch of the Orléans family, which is the junior branch of the Valois family. So there's Charles in the middle between these two. And as you can tell from the top right here, this became contentious. When it says mad wars, doesn't mean angry wars. It means insane, means foolish wars, means wars that were just crazy in terms of how unsettling and how unnecessary they were. So they started shortly after the king had been crowned and was now officially settled in, but nonetheless there was still dispute. Anne became his guardian, but the question was how far her regency would extend, and Louis d'Orléans was disgruntled, and this provided an occasion for him to gather support not only from his cousin but from other nobles, just like in Spain, just like in England. Then you get these noble factions developing over the question of the governorship of Charles VIII. I'm going to back up for just a second there. So there is this conflict, and as part of this conflict in those first 2 years, another interesting thing happens. That is to say that as a way of making sure that her claims are validated by an official body, in order to settle her claim to be regent, Anne de Beaujeu calls in 1484 an Estates General. Knecht points out that one of the aspects that was interesting of that Estates General was that much as it confirmed her as guardian and even as regent, it also gave the estates a chance to make claims and complain about situations while they had the king and the regent's attention. So that body talked about more than simply the question of the regency. It became a moment when the lower classes could complain about the tie. The nobility can complain about preserving their traditional privileges. They could talk about, church disputes, all that kind of thing. So the Estates General of 1484 affirmed regency, but it also lowered the tie for the taxpayers and affirmed and consolidated noble exclusive rights to hunting and to the territory and the armaments of hunting, to the lands for hunting, to their exclusive right to hunt on those lands. And so it became a brief moment of, if not constitutionalism, at least a reminder that there were other bodies than the king that had certain medieval privileges and a certain opportunity for voice in the affairs of the kingdom. All right, having said that, domestically that was what was happening, but it meant that there was basically war, 1484, 1485, 1486, small-scale war with regular rebellions by Louis d'Orléans and his followers, regular confiscation of their estates, stripping them of titles, but then having to invite them back into the council because who else are you going to rely on but your own nobility? So that was destabilizing internally. The other destabilizing thing was externally. That is to say, this is the period when in the later 1480s, what happens is that conflict with the territory of Brittany gets mixed up with the succession battles between the factions, and they all combine together so that you would be supporting one side or another based on how you hoped one of those two conflicts would turn out. Let me explain what I mean. If you look at this slide, Brittany is ruled by the dukes. At this point, Francis, Duke of Brittany, over here. He generally is trying to protect Brittany's independence at the same time as the French are generally trying to absorb Brittany. Often, Henry VII of England, at this point, is supportive of Brittany because that weakens his main rival, which is the French king. Additionally, on the eastern flank, Maximilian, Holy Roman Emperor, tends to be supportive of Brittany because there too, if Brittany maintains its independence, then France is that much weaker when resisting his attempts on France's eastern border. So both Maximilian, Holy Roman Emperor, and Henry of England have an interest in keeping Brittany independent in order to stick it to France. Same thing with Ferdinand of Aragon down here in the south. He has an interest in supporting Brittany against consolidation from the French so that the French won't be paying attention to his depredations down here. Louis d'Orléans has an interest in supporting Brittany because that undercuts his rivals, the Beaujus, Anne and Philip, who are doing their best to press France's claim against Brittany. So he's doing it, supporting Brittany, as part of his factional battle against Anne and Philip as regents for Charles VIII. All right, so what that means is that the Mad Wars, which are relatively recent, and the Breton Wars, which have been going on for decades intermittently, conjoin in 1487 or so over this issue of supporting or resisting Brittany as an independent country. This comes to a head when Charles VIII himself is old enough to take the field, starting in 1487, and first he captures Louis d'Orléans in battles in Brittany for Brittany's autonomy and independence, and then critically defeats Francis, Duke of Brittany, in the Battle of Saint-Aubin-de-Cormier in 1488, and forces Francis, Duke of Brittany, to agree to the Peace of Le Verger, or the Peace of Le Verger, whichever, in 1488, which makes it so that Francis, Duke of Brittany, even though he retains his independence, has to agree on one critical thing: to consult the King of France and to abide